Nicole, you've made the big leap. You've left your job to pursue visual storytelling with Nicole Bedford Films. How are you feeling about that?
I'm getting used to it. I'm getting used to being home and having to manage my own schedule, having to set boundaries around my time. I have only been off for approximately a month now because I started working on Nicole Bedford Films full time as of the beginning of April. And for the first 2 weeks, I was trying to fit exercise into my day and realized that that wasn't working out with my schedule. And so I've been testing out different scheduling in order to figure out what's going to fit the best.
So paint the picture for us. Like what motivated you to make this big transition from? I believe you left your full-time job. Yes.
Well, technically the contract ended.
Okay.
I was working on a project and it was 7-year project. And so this was the end of the 7 years. And
Sounds like a big project.
Yeah, it was a $2.5 million project.
Wow.
Yeah. But I was offered more full-time work after that, but I made the decision to say no because I've been telling myself for at least a year that I was going to, at the end of the contract, it was the perfect time to try starting my own business. And the reason, like, why am I motivated to do that is because I have wanted to be a filmmaker for a long time, but my life hasn't really gone in that direction fully. So my parents were both in film and television, and I wanted to be in film and television too. But they were like, no, go to university. You got to go get a university degree. And thank goodness I did, because it's taken me in crazy directions that I wouldn't have thought of. But in university, you don't learn video production, right? So there were a couple film classes, but that was it. And so my hands-on experience was pretty limited. I did a co-op at Army News here in Ottawa, and I thought that I was going to be doing some editing and hands-on production stuff. Got very limited access to that, but learned a lot by just being there and seeing it. And on the side, I started to do my own little video projects, either for clients, and I say clients loosely because at the time I don't think I was getting paid for them, but I was doing them. And then when I went to do my master's afterwards, because after you do an undergrad degree, what do? You go to a master's. In my master's, I was at Queen's University in Cultural Studies, and that's basically like you can study whatever you want. And I knew that I wanted to build video into that. So I ended up researching and learning how to do training modules, and I did a bunch of videos surrounding doctor-patient communication, and people liked that. And I also did TAing, teaching assistant, for classes in video production, like where they were doing hands-on stuff. So I don't know, I've had components of film in my life since the very beginning. And then I went from there into a job where I was doing solely project management and or communications, but not really video. And I found every year that I was there, while I was learning a huge amount that has prepared me for running my own business, I was missing that creative component of my existence, I guess. And I was feeling really lost. And I kept thinking, you're only going to get older. It's only going to get harder to leave that full-time job to be without a salary. So you better do it now. And this is a perfect timing. It's an end of a project, and it's a great jumping point.
What was your undergrad in? You
Communications.
Said, okay, so you did a degree in communications, and you said you did some film studies classes. You had some electives in film?
There were two video 1 and video 2. And depending on the teacher, you either got to do actual videos or you learned more theory. And thankfully, I got to do videos, but yeah.
And in the journey, because you spoke of, you're thankful for the fact that, you went on to do a master's degree in cultural studies, and you found a way to integrate video in it. Overall, what is it about video and visual storytelling that is so important to you? Because it sounds like you're obviously passionate about it, but what is it about visual storytelling that's important for Nicole?
See, that's a really interesting question, because when I was initially interested in filmmaking, because my parents were in it, I was...
And to tell us a little bit about your parents, in what capacity were they involved in
Sure.
filmmaking?
Yeah, my mom was a props master, started as a props assistant, actually started in the art department and then kind of didn't like that, so went into props. And my father started out as a set dresser, and then he became an art department coordinator and kind of made that role because they worked in LA. My dad's dream was to go to LA and pursue a career in the film business. And when he first started, I guess I just learned this weekend, actually, that art coordination it wasn't a normal set job. And he advocated for it. And since then, it's normal to see it on film sets. So both my parents were in the film industry, both in LA, and then when we moved to Canada.
So he started that, you say he started the art coordination?
Well, he didn't, I wouldn't say that he's necessarily like hailed as, right. Brad did the first art coordination job, but it was a very rare position when he started. Okay. And after they left LA, my understanding is that has since become a job that you see on all big productions, right? So, and then when we came to Canada, my mom stayed in film and television, and my father was a stay-at-home father. And so that's kind of the background of my parents being in film. My mom is no longer in film. She's now a librarian technician.
Cool. And obviously this kind of, would you say, was it an influential sort of, the fact that your parents were involved in the film video industry? Beyond that, what other motivations did you have to get involved in visual storytelling? Right.
So as I had kind of started there, when I first wanted to be in film, I wanted to be a narrative. And it's because I was a storyteller. I used to write stories every single night when I was growing up, to the point where my parents would have to yell at me to go to bed because I was sitting there typing up stories all the time, stories from my dreams, stories that came out of nowhere, stories about my day. Like, I was a storyteller, I would say, and I was an avid book reader. And I was really interested in telling stories through film and becoming the first female Steven Spielberg. So that was my initial motivation. But because I went through university and into a master's degree, and my master's degree was pretty like activism radical, and I say that because a lot of the people in my program considered themselves activists in art in some way. And I started to think about the ways in which film impacts people on a very deep level and it can encourage people to change. And I really do believe in the fact that media has a huge influence over the ways in which we behave in the world. And because I believe in the idea of you see it, you do it. And I don't think that that's a literal you see it, you do it all the time. Like, I would never say point blank, yeah, we see guns and therefore we're using guns. But it does create an appeal. It creates an image of what we want to potentially strive for. Whether that's good or bad. And so I am now motivated to use film in a way that impacts people, that flips the script, that challenges them to think about the things that I'm obsessed with thinking about all the time, like identity as one of them. So that's why I'm passionate about film now. And that's why I've kind of moved into documentary. Also because documentary is a lot easier to do as a one-person crew than narrative film, because narrative film, you at the very least need actors, and other crew is useful to have as well.
So the experience as far as, the activism community was a positive one.
Oh, yeah.
Being around activists and yourself, would you say you're an activist as well?
I'm learning to be an activist. Actually, I've probably been one of those people who thought they were an activist for a while, but never really actually truly lived it. Like, I went to one science march in my undergrad, like a fight for science. We walked to Parliament Hill.
There you go. So you're officially, that's good though. I mean, we need, facts are good. Science is good, especially in this day and age where people are questioning whether the earth is flat and climate change is real or not. But what I wanted to ask, in terms of stories, you're saying you want to flip the script. Give us an idea of what sort of scripts you're going to flip, and what sort of stories on what sort of social issues you want to tackle.
I kind of have fallen into women's stories, actually, which I've just realized recently and thought, that's so strange that that's where I gravitated, because, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. My mom was a feminist. My grandmother is definitely a feminist. And I was influenced by feminist ideas when I was growing up, but I never really thought, like, I never really thought that women's stories needed to be told, and a diverse number of women's stories, like not just quote unquote white women's stories, for example. And so telling women's stories has been where I've been led. And I would say that I didn't necessarily specifically choose that, but I'm obviously very interested in it. So the first short documentary I did was on women becoming mothers for the first time, and hearing about their experiences and thinking like, what is that like? Because I'm not a mother, and so I wanted to know. And in fact, that was a fascinating experience because I interviewed one of my cousins for that. It was very much a project, look first in your own backyard. So I asked my friends and my cousins to be in it. And we filmed at a family gathering. And because I did that interview, suddenly all the women there who had had children were now talking about their first birth and what that meant to them. And this was like initiating a conversation amongst all the women in my family and the men too, because they were there. And so they were hearing women's stories that they may not have heard. They may have been at the birth, but they may not have seen it the same way. Or maybe they weren't even at the birth because there was multiple generations of women who were talking about this. And so I don't know if that's necessarily flipping the script in that perspective, but, opening up and being willing to tell multiple people's stories and not just being narrowly focused, and being open to the kinds of stories that come to you that wouldn't necessarily be something that appeals to the mainstream, so to speak.
Sure. And initially, when you said you wanted to focus on a social issue or theme, women was the main one that jumped at you. But why were you surprised that that topic? Because the way you answered it, almost like you surprised yourself that women. Sorry, I'm not phrasing.
No.
You were almost.
I'm surprised I went into women.
Yeah.
Why?
And I say that because it's obvious that there's a huge demand for stories from more than half of the population. Usually it's 55%, right? So there's a ton of stories from women that probably need to be told from women, right? I think as storytellers. So what surprised you about that, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I would say that my learning curve in terms of social justice is it's been a slow curve, and it's gotten a much steeper now in believing that those stories should be told piece. Before then, I don't think I was really in the know enough, like I wasn't learned enough to realize that while I realized that women weren't equal to men, I didn't necessarily notice the discrepancy of how many men's stories were being told. In narrative, it's almost always a male character who is the center point of the story. And then in documentary, I wasn't really hugely familiar with that realm, but oftentimes it's men that they're doing stories on. And I have never been, maybe until now, maybe I'm changing, one to say, I'm going to pick something because it appeals, it tells the story of a specific identity. I don't like that idea of choosing something because it's a specific identity. But at the same time, now that I'm growing and learning, it's kind of like choosing to tell science stories over English ones, English lit stories. So why does it matter to pick a specific niche that way? And I'm glad that I've fallen into it, because now I'm working on a full-length documentary on violence against women and activism. Wow. So I am learning all about activism and how to do it, basically, and the ways in which I can use my film in a powerful way to change people.
Tell us more about this this documentary you're working on.
So it's called The Smallest Steps, and it's a documentary following the stories of women who are becoming activists in different ways. So two of the women are law students or students at law, and they're transitioning into their legal careers, and they're working with a stellar role model, Leanne Burns, who is a women's lawyer, family lawyer here in Ottawa, and she strictly represents women who have experienced and are trying to escape violence. And
is this family law?
Yes, okay, family law, not criminal. It's separate because I didn't know this, and I'm learning so much. So I may get some of the I'm not going to say statistics, but I may get some of the information slightly wrong. But my understanding is that if somebody's experienced experiencing violence, they have two avenues, and they can pursue both or just one or the other. So criminal court deals with any kind of like assault or actual violence. And if you want to charge the perpetrator, family court is the secondary if you want to get a divorce, obviously, and you want to protect your children. And that's a big part of it too, because a lot of women who are embroiled in family violence, they have children too. So that's a big barrier to them leaving, right? They don't want to risk the father getting the child. And what I'm also learning is that family law for victims of violence often takes a very long time, because the perpetrator is basically pulling out all the stops to make that commitment of that legal term go on and on and on. So somebody I met recently, she was in family court for 15 years. The perpetrator dragged it out for 15 years. She had to keep going.
Are you serious?
And that's like legal fees
years.
and yeah. Whereas the people that we're working with, two of them are survivors that we're following, and one of them was in court for 5. I mean, still, 5 years seems like a very long time to try to escape your abuser.
Right.
And more importantly, to help your children escape that abuser. Whether they're being abused or not, you don't really want them to be there unsupervised just in case, right?
For sure. So in this documentary, which I believe it's shot in Ottawa, yeah?
Yep.
You're following these two law students as they're mentored by this family lawyer, and are you telling their point of view along with their clients?
We don't have access to the clients, but we're following 4 women. So 2 of them are the students, and just kind of figuring out where they're going. And we're only following a very small portion of time, 1 year, from the December 6th vigil in 2018 to the 2019 December 6th vigil, because this year is technically the 30th anniversary for the Polytechnic shootings in Montreal, the Montreal massacre. So that we're just looking at a very small window of time. And then in addition to the law students, we're also following 2 survivors of violence who have escaped their family violence, and they have been working to revitalize a group called Believe Croyez. And that group is a group of survivors who are looking to change practice, policy, law, that kind of thing, by lending the survivors' voice to that. So we're following all 4 of them, and it's really a story of how does one become an activist, because interwoven throughout their journey over the course of the year, we did, previous to me coming into the project, they did interviews with violence against women activists from the previous generation of activists. So women who've been working in it for 30, 40 years and who are now retiring, and they're still activists, because I don't know if you ever fully retire from being an activist, but they're not working in the field anymore. And so they did interviews to capture their stories as well. So it'll be interwoven throughout the stories of the 4 women.
What's it like working on such a project? It sounds actually very, very interesting and intense. And I could see that you're getting riled up just talking about it. What's it like for you personally?
It's a huge mix of emotions and a huge roller coaster kind of experience, because A, my first full-length film, B, my first film where I've ever had money and paid people, because all of my productions have been done where I've just done them myself, a 1-person crew, C, where I've had crew involved, and that all of that is scary, because I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Now, I was a project manager for 3.5 years, so I do know a bit about managing a big project, but I feel terrified. And I think that anybody who's starting a business or starting something new feels that way. But it's also, it's exciting. I get passionate talking to the women that we're following about potential solutions and strategies, and also where they are going in their individual lives. Like, I'm so excited for them to write their exams, the students, and to pass, and to be these kick-ass women in the world. That's really exciting, but also to talk about the bigger issues and the changes they might be able to make. And then at the same time, I'm now inundated with information about how depressing it is that women are, like, this violence against women, nobody cares about it. The reality is nobody gives a shit, or at least that's the way it feels. You have women come out to the Women's March, but then you still have media who's, like, a statistic that recently came out from a 2018 report was that every 2.5 days, a woman or a child dies in Canada. is killed, and most of the time that is because they've been killed by somebody they know. So that is femicide, basically. That's a lot of women in a year. Fewer people die of measles, and yet we're freaking the fuck out about people not getting their vaccinations for their kids. Fewer people die from that. So, like, I don't understand why we don't care, and the policies are regressing.
Do you think that people generally don't care, or maybe they're not? In this case, when we look at the perpetrators of this violence, which are men, are they being kind of are they being communicated to us to, hey, that's inappropriate behavior, like in terms of bullying, harassment, and violence, and all these kind of indicators of violence, right? Are men being engaged and communicated to? Do you think in regards to?
So I'm not an expert
Right.
in the violence against women realm.
Neither am I, but I'm just saying, like,
No,
it's
fair. It's a good question, and
because isn't that like a target demographic that needs to be, like, wouldn't I'm assuming they need to see this documentary, right? Because as a man, right? For example, obviously, it's going to inform me on these issues, right? And potentially have me engage other men on the topic, right? So I guess what I'm asking is, is this film who's the intended audience?
most documentaries don't start with an intended audience, which is ironic because coming from comms, and you are too, you're in social media, right? You never do something without your audience in mind. So I did think through the audience on this one, and my target audience are people who believe in human rights, who believe in equality, who maybe haven't found the motivation yet to get out and fight for some kind of cause. They believe in them, but they haven't tipped quite to getting out in the streets or going to volunteer for an organization or something like that. That's my target audience, whether that's men, women, non-binary folks, like anybody. So you were talking earlier about, are we communicating to men and all that, or are there programs communicating to men? The short answer is yes. There's definitely programs around violence against women that are specifically focused on men, like Manifest Change. That's capital MAN,
Right.
Ifest Change, and also the White Ribbon campaign you might have heard of. That's men handing out and educating other men on violence against women. And then, of course, it's a global issue. It's not just Canadian or North American, and so there's all kinds of organizations. Like I just learned of one called SASA that empowers people in communities in African countries to teach each other about violence against women. And a lot of times the advocates are men going around and teaching other men about violence against women, because it's a big deal. It harms communication.
It's as real as real, right? It's happening in our communities here. It's happening communities across, from coast to coast to coast, in every community. And even if you look at, and you mentioned, like, within these within the various Canadian communities, all these different cultures as to how women are treated, right? Like, I know from my own community there's almost there's unfortunately a lot of sexism, and with that sexism in terms of expectations between genders, right? Gender roles and so on and so forth, and violence is a part of that, unfortunately, as it is in many others. In jumping on this important documentary, how has it changed you? I think you've kind of answered it before, but has it changed your approach to working? Because now you're working for yourself, correct? You're an independent content creator.
Yeah.
Right? So how has it changed your work? Like, when you're dealing with these subjects in this documentary, are you approaching them in the same way as you would have had previously on your other projects? Has any of that changed as to how you go about doing your storytelling?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. One of the areas that I'm trying to grow in terms of documentary is is my willingness to be vulnerable with my subjects, because the reality is I'm asking them to put their lives on display. And here I am hiding behind the camera. And so it's not so much to me about getting in front of the camera necessarily myself, although I am going to challenge myself to do that in the future. But it's letting down my guard when I'm there just talking to them. That's something that I'm working towards. And when I think this subject of violence against women and having women who have experienced violence and also women who are fighting to end that, being open with me about their lives, I think I really got to get moving on this vulnerability piece. I think it motivates me more, I guess, is what I would say. But I don't know if it's necessarily changed the way that I've approached filmmaking.
I'll give you an example, because the subject matter is so intense.
Mm-hmm.
It's so personal. It's so raw, right? And you were diving into this process of telling these individual stories. Sometimes some people build a wall to counter the vulnerability, right?
I don't think I'm doing that. In
Right,
fact,
no.
I think I'm going into the pit of sadness and also thinking about the ways in which violence has impacted me. Like, I know this is trivial and I keep coming back to it as an example in all my, when I talk about violence, but like the idea that I have to lock the doors of my car when I get in at night, that didn't resonate with me as an impact of violence against women. I didn't make that connection for a very long time. And then there was some Twitter event where somebody said, what would you do if men had a 9 p.m. curfew? And that was one of the answers, was I wouldn't lock the doors of my car at night. And crazy enough, I bring this up now, 2 days ago, my mother sent me an article about a woman who was basically assaulted because a man popped up in the back seat of her car and forced her to drive somewhere and then assaulted her in Port Dover. Port Dover is a tiny little town, and that's where I spent some of my childhood. Mm-hmm. Nobody would ever think about locking their car doors. In fact, my grandparents leave their house doors open all the time. Wow. So that's a reality. You do have to lock your car doors as a woman, both leaving your car, both getting into your car, and like driving away. That's ridiculous. No man ever thinks of that.
Mm-hmm. So that one example, like when we speak of like the subject matter is so intense and so raw that it's as you mentioned, it's opened you up in terms of your own experiences, and it's giving you insight because you're dealing with a variety of activists. What can viewers of your documentary, and I know I'm putting you under the spot here, but what can they expect from this film? If there's one thing that like you want them to walk away after viewing the film, what would that thing be?
I want them to walk away inspired and hopeful that they can participate in creating change, even if they don't know exactly anything about the issue or where to start. Like this, my hope is that they'll see that other people have had those same fears and have still taken a step to learn something and taken a step to try a march and taken a step to then decide to do something big, like go to law school and decide to represent women who have experienced violence. I mean, that doesn't just come out of nowhere. Most people don't wake up and go, I'm going to do this big activism thing. Most people, not all. It starts with a little step. And that's why the documentary is called The Smallest Steps, because it's really about we need all of us taking those steps in that direction, whether you're, I can't visually show you this, but whether you're at the beginning of the line or halfway through or closer to the end of learning how to be an activist and making those big changes. We need all of you doing those things. And so my hope is that the documentary will inspire people to actually take their first step if they haven't yet already. I mean, going to the documentary might be the first step, right, unless they're doing it because they support me. But going to the documentary might be the first step, and I'm hoping they'll do another step after that. And for that reason, I am going to be partnering with women's organizations across Canada and outlining the ways in which people can contribute so that if they feel hopeful at the end of my documentary, those opportunities are right there in front of them. And from the like smallest scale of making a small donation to the biggest scale of like the Sexual Assault Center of Ottawa trains people for 6 months to become counselors to support. So it can be that intense, or it can be as small as, maybe an hour a week or an hour a month.
What, as far as, with the various characters that you're dealing with in this film, what have they told you about the experience thus far, as appearing on camera and having you document them and follow them around? Have they said anything funny or anything interesting that's motivating you or challenging you?
I think one thing that has increased my motivation. So usually when a documentarian does a documentary, they get to know their subject in advance. And for me, it didn't really work that way. I'm doing the documentary in partnership with Leanne Burns. And she's the one who said, I know some people who would be great for this documentary. And she introduced me to them. So she has a relationship with them, but I don't. And our relationship has been developing as production has happened, which I would highly recommend that you don't do that. Develop a relationship first so people feel comfortable getting in front of the camera and that they trust you, because it is a big trust thing. I mean, they might make mistakes, just like I might make a mistake here in something that I say, and I have to trust that you're not going to misrepresent me, right?
Right.
And so one thing that has been great to watch is that I've been trying really hard to give my subjects information in advance about what we're going to cover, why we're going to cover it, not interview questions in advance, but like a general overview. And I've been working to, anytime I'm going to put out a product, to send it to them for approval, or at least review,
right,
so that they feel like they're in control to a certain extent,
and
so that they realize,
heard, right?
that I have their best interests at heart. And what the cool part is, I did the promo for our Indiegogo campaign, and when I sent that out, suddenly things seemed to start to change in terms of the trust. So two of the subjects, one of them came back, and I ended up having a really long conversation with her about, here's how I think the documentary should go. Suddenly this person was highly involved and invested in the documentary to an extent that, where before I think she was a little bit more reticent. Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm participating because it's important and I don't want to say no. And, but now it's like, let's do this with the documentary. Here's some directions that we should go in. So to see that they're trusting me enough to interact and engage and collaborate is it's a relief because it's really hard to build a relationship when they're in front of the camera, right?
So they're obviously very committed to telling this story. They're emotionally invested in the story, but they also want to collaborate with you.
Some of them, yeah, for sure.
Now, I saw another video that you did, another story you told about a group of women who attended a retreat.
Yep.
Tell us about that film.
So that was an interesting one. My friend wanted to do a girls' weekend and picked this retreat. Actually, we had two options. Do we go to New York City or do we go to this retreat? And I said, I would never go to a retreat, so let's do that. And then as I learned about the retreat, I thought this would make a great subject for a documentary. And I worked with the organizers to find some people who were attending who would maybe be interested in participating. And then I went over the course of a weekend. I had no idea what was going to happen, which is also apparently not what documentarians do. Usually they plan shit out, apparently, which is what I'm learning in my directing internship. But I went with no idea how it would work. I just knew that I wanted to interview them at the start before the weekend had really started, in the middle and at the end, and then follow them and do video footage of what they were doing. And one of the ladies that I was interviewing, she had this great story about learning to love herself. And I think that's a message that really resonates with people right now. Anyway, that documentary was an interesting one, because when I came back from that documentary and I looked through the footage, at first I was excited when I started editing, and then I got stuck. I got the equivalent of writer's block. Wow. And it took me 6 months to get back into it, because I just kept thinking, I don't know what I'm doing with this. I hate this. I'm not sure. Like, I really didn't know what I was going to do with it. Right. And then I was like, I need to qualify for the Canada Council for the Arts if I want to be able to apply for grants. So I've got to get a documentary into a film festival that counts in order. So that motivated me to finish. And in fact, there's lots of stuff that I've learned from that process. But I did get it into a screening, my very first one, with the Toronto Indie Night. Plug for them, because they are an awesome festival that is dedicated to featuring indie art, particularly for people who don't necessarily get into other festivals, which is a great stepping stone when you're starting out in this field. So props to them. And one woman basically does all the organizing. So awesome. And I screened there, and then I applied to be part of the Canada Council for the Arts, and I got in. But the coolest part was Sadie's story. People at the screening were contacting her afterwards, random strangers, telling her how much her story meant to them and how much it impacted their lives. And lots of people are thinking of going to the retreat, so obviously it was a great promo material too. But but I thought, I didn't know that story would impact people so much, and I'm so glad that I shared it now, and that Sadie was willing to share it with me, because it's obviously touched other people and made a difference in their lives. So that's that story about the Raw Retreat.
Very cool. And what is it about, what is it that really challenges you as a visual storyteller? Is it the planning portion? Is it, in this case, it was more of a discovery mode where you shot first and then you said, I'll get to the top, the middle, and the end, and then I'll tell the story as I see it in post. What is the most challenging aspect? And I know it's a general question. What is the most challenging aspect of your job and what you do?
It's coming up with a way to keep a story compelling, because there are the viewers who are watching it because the subject matter really matters to them, and they're going to watch it probably all the way through unless you do a really bad job of telling that story and it gets really snorry in the middle. So one of my first documentaries, well, actually they're all kind of one of my firsts, but I Is for Identity was very much a think piece. I was looking at why people like to perform, and it was very much a think piece, so there wasn't much of a story there. So people who are interested in the topic, who want to think about these things, they found it very interesting to listen to that documentary, and there was lots of interesting things that were said in the documentary. But there were also people who found it really boring, because it didn't have a beginning, middle, end like a traditional story, and there was no real climax, there was no real arc, there was no real energy in that sense. And so finding that process has challenged me the most, because even with Raw Retreat, like I submitted it to Short of the Week, and I paid to get feedback on it, and they were like, halfway through I was bored. And then when I look at it now, and everybody's got a subjective opinion, of course, but when I look at it now, I can see that, the story, in a lot of ways, Sadie's story kind of ended in the middle. And then I had this huge long denouement. And so while that's valuable to some of the viewers that are watching it that are very invested in the topic, that's not necessarily valuable to all viewers, because it's a long ending. I mean, how many stories, even narrative, do you watch where the ending just goes on and on and on? Very few, right? Lord of the Rings, maybe. But you know what I'm saying.
What? So you're diving headfirst into this, right? You've got Nicole Bedford Films. You've got stories on the go. How are you feeling about all the momentum you're creating? What are some of the range of emotions that you're gravitating on?
Well, I definitely go up and down, sometimes even in one day. So I'll be like excited, doing a happy dance. Oh my God, I just got a contribution to my Indiegogo campaign. Or, oh my God, somebody just said yes to booking us. You get the idea. Yeah. To like extreme lows where I'll see something like a video or a documentary, or, I'm in a short doc mentorship, so I'll look at other people's films and I'll think, oh, why am I doing this? This is the worst. Or I just did a shoot with one of the women from the Violence Against Women documentary, and when I got back, I realized that my camera had turned off, the one that was recording audio. because I was using 2 cameras as 1-person crew. Right. And so I missed capturing all of this really intimate content with the subject, where she was telling me about her brother. And that was a meltdown moment where I was like, what am I doing? I shouldn't be in film. This is dumb. And I've got no formal training in it. So that just makes the imposter syndrome even higher. So yeah, it's all over the place right now. And I'm sure that the more I get into it, the more I practice, the better I'll be. Just like anything. Like any start to a new job, you're learning. So.
And what's it like being a creative person in Ottawa?
Well, what I've heard is that people who are going to be successful in a creative field move from Ottawa. That's what I've heard. However, we've had some big announcements recently. Like, we're going to get a sound stage. That's a big deal for Ottawa. And there's lots of films being made here. They're often productions from Toronto or Montreal, but they are coming here, and actors are being part of them, and obviously locations and crew. But it really depends on what you want to do, I think, because one aspect of being in Ottawa that I really like is that I have more likelihood of being a big fish in a small pond than if I were to move to Toronto. And what it really comes down to is, what is your definition of success? Right. And I think that's different for everyone. Like, I'm not looking to make millions and millions of dollars. If I do, fantastic. But I'm looking to have a comfortable career where I get to do something that I'm passionate about, that I enjoy, that's fun, as opposed to just sitting and not being happy at my job. So that's really my motivation, is to do something that pays the bills and I can live comfortably, but I may not be the best of the best. And part of that is, the older you get, you realize you may never be the best of the best, and that's okay.
And more importantly, you're challenging yourself, right? By doing this, you're taking yourself out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
You're putting yourself out there, and you're learning so much, because you're exposing yourself to people's stories, right? And you're learning new technical skills, but you're hearing perspectives and opinions, and I think that's growth, and that's a win-win. What sort of feedback are you getting from friends, family, and ex-coworkers on this transition here? Well, what are some of the opinions that you're getting?
I think I've had excellent support. Like, I'm so lucky that my family and my friends have been extremely patient, because over the past year, when I've been working full time, I've also been taking on video contracts and working after work to build up to where I am now. And so I haven't seen my friends very much. Also, my coworkers, well, mostly my boss was really supportive, and in fact recommended me for a contract that I ultimately ended up getting and working on last year. And so now I've got a niche in terms of client-based work. So I've been really lucky. People have been extremely supportive, and they come out and they watch my films, even if, I've already made them watch it online to see it in advance. They come out and support. So I don't know. I've been very fortunate that way.
Well, you're touching on some really important themes, and as far as, kind of steering up the activism on important issues. And we wish you all the best. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of these films. And let's touch base in the future, and then let's see, how you're doing. So thank you very much for your time, Nicole Bedford Films, and all the best to you.
Thank you very much.